institute की तरफ on है. A very good afternoon, everybody. Respected Professor Vivek Lal Sir, Director PGI, all dignitaries, esteemed faculty members of PGI, and my dear friends. Today, Postgraduate Institute of Medical Education and Research, PGI Chandigarh, is one of the reputed institute in India and has learned a good name across the world. Again, the Department of Neurology and Neurosurgery has contributed a lot, and in terms of patient care and in terms of research, has also earned a good reputation worldwide. But the department, what we see today, is the effort of a single man, and he is no other than Professor Dr. Raj Gulati. It was his effort, his contribution, and he has almost contributed his entire life to form the Department of Neurology and Neurosurgery in this zone of India, and has trained many neurologists and neurosurgeons who are now leading in many centers of India and abroad also. Every year, all the members of PGI gathered here to remember his contribution and to pay tribute to his efforts. So today, all of us are gathered here to celebrate this occasion. This is the 17th oration in the name of Professor Dr. Raj Gulati. So on behalf of Department of Neurology and Neurosurgery, I welcome, and of course the Department of Neuroanesthesia and Neuroradiology also, I welcome all of you to 17th Professor Raj Gulati Oration. First, may I request our director, Professor Vivek Lal sir, to address this August gathering. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to a few of the founding fathers of PGI and Professor Duffau from France. France is a favorite country of mine because my favorite author, Dominique Lapierre, is from France. He's written one of the best books ever written about India, The City of Joy. And I mentioned this when the French ambassador had come here looking for Lee Corbusiers' assets. In fact, PGI is a Lee Corbusiers' asset. I didn't know that till the French ambassador came and he went around looking for furniture of the past. And unfortunately, it was very difficult to retrace all the furniture. Professor Raj Gulati was one of the founding fathers of PGI. We all know that. And I never get tired of saying that whatever we are today is because of the founding fathers. I don't think we have gone beyond what they did for us. I'm making a very honest, very blunt statement that what we are today is because of our founding fathers who did a selfless, immeasurable job of commitment when it came to PGI. He was the founding father of both neurology and neurosurgery. I had a very brief encounter with him, and I never get tired of repeating that encounter every year on this day in front of his daughter and son-in-law. It's something like this. His only son was suffering from jaundice. He had a debilitating neurological illness. Professor Chopra was the chairman of neurology at that time, and I happened to be the junior resident. So Professor Chopra told me, Vivek, you have to go and sample his son. I was told who he is, and I was sampling his son. So Professor Gulati was sitting next to his son, who wasn't very well. And I said, sir, if you feel comfortable, I can call my senior resident. I was a junior resident at that time, posted in neurology, and he made this statement, no, I have full faith in you. You are a PGite, I have full faith in you. You need not call anyone from my side. If you want to from your side, you can do it. But from my side, you need not call anyone. And that changed my life forever. That single statement changed my life forever. I realized just how much of confidence I got when one of the founding fathers is entrusting his son's life into the hands of a junior resident. That's what Dr. Gulati was. I just heard about Professor Duffau. In fact, I don't know what made you a neurosurgeon. You should have been a neurologist. I was just listening to the kind of things that you do. Neurosurgeons in PGI believe in cutting, and you're doing thinking, and thinking. I don't know how on earth are you a neurosurgeon. You see, Igaz Moniz got the Nobel Prize for functional neurosurgery. I don't know whether you're aware of that. In 1937, he had started functional neurosurgery, prefrontal dichotomies for psychiatric disorders, OCDs, obsessive compulsive disorders. And he went on to get the Nobel Prize for functional neurosurgery. After that, things took a U-turn, things went down the ladder. But now we are getting more and more neurosurgeons who are more prudent in their cutting and who believe in mapping also. It was a joy to note that someone of that stature, someone of that nature, someone with that trajectory of thought is here today to deliver this Gulati oration. In fact, I would concur with you, sir, as I was told, that it's more important not to operate, but to ensure that whatever you do bears fruit and the patient should go back to where he was pre-op. That's very important. There's no point taking out the whole tumor and then the patient being bedridden for life. It's better you take out half that tumor and the patient goes back to work, which is how it should be, which is what is meant as good surgery, good outcome of surgery. Sir, thank you so much for coming. It's a joy to know you, sir. And I once again thank Monica and Ravi. As always, we meet on this day every year. Welcome to this Dr. Gulati oration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So now may I request the head of the Department of Neurosurgery, Professor S.K. Gupta, sir, to give an introduction of Professor Raj Gulati, sir.
Okay, sorry. Yas Moniz also discovered angiography, which is more important than when he discovered lithotomy. Where he got the Nobel Prize for lobotomy. Okay, anyway, it is my honor to introduce Professor D.R. Gulati to this audience. Many of the senior people already knows about him, but for the juniors, it's important to know what he was and what his legacy is. Okay, Professor D.R. Gulati, 1923 to 2003. Professor Raj Gulati was born in Amritsar on 9th August 1923, being one of the 6 children born to late Shri Arur Chand Gulati and Srimati Attar Kaur. He graduated from KE Medical College, Lahore, then moved to Punjab. He did Masters in Surgery from Medical College, Amritsar, and thereafter worked in Punjab Medical Services for 5 years. After that, he was selected for neurosurgery training in the Colombo Plan 1957, and he went to Montreal Neurological Institute in Canada. He worked with stalwarts like Professor Wilder Penfield, Professor Rasmussen, and Professor William Combe. At that time, at Montreal, his colleagues from India who also trained under these stalwarts were Professor P.N. Tandon, who founded the neurosurgery department at AIIMS, Professor V.S. Dave, who was the founder of in KGMC of neurosurgery, D.N. Radish from Bombay. They were his Indian colleagues. He was also involved in research on brain edema with Hannah Papias, who was at that time considered the authority on brain edema, and Dr. Gulati worked with her. And the publication on the subject was considered landmark at that time. He joined PJ in 1962 as assistant professor, and he was given the responsibility of starting both the Department of Neurology and Neurosurgery. His keen interest in treating seizure disorders spurred him to procure an EEG machine in 1966, and he started seizure clinic. In fact, his reading of EEG was so phenomenal that neurologists used to come to him to understand the EEGs. He was a master in reading EEGs, and it was a landmark in that time. He was a great academician and had a passion for research. And this for the younger people who at present the trend has changed towards more imaging and towards technology. But it is still important to know that he relied largely on detailed history, which is still relevant today, on exams to reach the possible diagnosis with the help of carotid angiography, ventriculography, pneumocography, and myelography. These were very painful procedures. Thankfully, we are not required to do this, but these were difficult to do, and he did all these things. His clinical record examinations, documentation were exemplary. The same can be said of his EEG reporting. He was a visionary and a great scientist in neurosurgery, but he also had an excellent knowledge of neurology, a legacy of his training in MIA, Montreal Neurological Institute, and the pioneering neurological institute in the world at that time. At that time, when he joined, the neurosurgery was not a separate department, it was part of the Department of Surgery. And he was instrumental in carving out the Department of Neurosurgery from General Surgery in 1978. In this, we see a lot of, it's a very crowded photograph, but I mean Professor Gulati is sitting here. In 1980, he was elected unopposed as the President of the Neurological Society of India, and was also elected a Fellow of the National Academy of Medical Sciences in the same year. This is some of the photographs which I could get from the site and from the department. He served as Dean PGI in 1983, had also the charge of acting director PGI from 1981 March to November 1981. He was also conferred the rank of honorary consultant to the armed forces. Some of the photographs in the initial years of PGI when it was inaugurated in 1967 by Dr. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. And these are old photographs showing Professor Gulati, Professor R.K. Suri, R.C. Mahajan, Dr. I.C. Pathak, Dr. Kuldeep Singh, Dr. G.S. Chopra, and Dr. Jolly. I mean, the people on the front must know all these people. They must have worked there, sir. So these are some of the photographs with Dr. Kak here, Dr. Khosla, Dr. Samba Sivam, who was a neurosurgeon from Trivandrum, Dr. B.K. Sharma, Professor Khosla, Dr. Kak, Dr. P.N. Tandon Senior, Dr. Sehgal, Arjundar Sehgal from Delhi. This is from the Bhargava Auditorium with some of the old people, Dr. Mrs. Amrita Tiwari, Dr. Tandon, Professor Chopra is senior. I think this is Dr. Talwar here. So these are old photographs which I could get. These are again some memories of the people. He trained with Dr. Rasmussen, whom he considered his mentor. And Professor, I could get this from Dr. Mrs. Monica's memoirs in the book, which I will just tell you. Professor Gulati's family shared a special bond with Dr. Rasmussen, under whom he trained in Montreal. And family visit of Dr. Gulati to their house, to Dr. Rasmussen's house during Christmas, was an annual feature. This is Dr. Gulati with Dr. Nirmala Gulati, and these are family photographs of Dr. Gulati with his family, Monica Gulati and Ravi Bhatia, who's the senior, with the children, family. He superannuated from PGI in 1983. In after retirement, he often used to visit the department, attend Saturday morning clinic rounds, and interact with younger students on whom he left his mark. Over and above, you talk to anyone who was associated with Professor Gulati, the one thing which everyone likes to say and is fond of saying first of all is, he was an excellent human being. He was a fatherly figure who was respected by all his pupils and his staff working with him and his colleagues. It was full of human values, a magnanimous person who did not believe in criticizing and speaking ill about anyone. He had his share of personal tragedies. He lost his son due to hepatitis B, as Dr. Vivek was saying, and his wife due to chest infection during his lifetime. He himself was found to have carcinoma of colon, and despite all treatment, he was admitted in PG at that time. He expired on 26 October 2003. Last year, before Professor Kak passed away, along with Dr. Mathuria, they published a book about founders of neurosciences. The first one is Professor Raj Gulati, the gentleman neurosurgeon. Our title is The Gentleman Neurosurgeon. And the contributors of the book were Professor P.N. Tandon from AIIMS Delhi, Professor Valiyathan, many of you may recognize him, who was one of the first director and founder of Sri Chitra Tirunal Institute at Thiruvananthapuram, Dr. Talwar, Sujit Pandit, the first neuroanesthetist probably, and Dr. Murthy, Dr. Bose has also contributed, Dr. N.M. Gupta is here, Dr. Vig has also written a few lines on the book, Dr. Raut, who was a neurosurgeon in Sri Chitra, who trained here under Professor Kak and Dr. Gulati, Mrs. Vig, Dr. Khosla, of course, and Dr. Radha Krishnan, who is also from this place. The Professor D.R. Gulati Oration, again in the words of Ms. Monica, held in PGI every year, bears testimony to the fact that there is no expiration date between a father figure and those who loved and respected him. The last share is again from the book by Dr. Khosla. आए बहार बन के लुभा कर चले गए, क्या राज था दिल में छुपा कर चले गए. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much, sir, for giving a complete description of who Professor Raj Gulati was and what is his value today also. So now it is an honor and proud privilege for me to give an introduction of Professor Duffau, who is the orator of 17th Professor Raj Gulati Oration. So Professor Duffau, born on 8th August 1966 in France. He got the medical degree from University of Paris in 1995, and he did his PhD in neurosciences from the University of Paris. And the PhD was probably on neuroradiology, some radiological aspect concerned to neurosurgery, and habilitation from University of Paris in 2002. He became the professor of neurosurgery in 2006 and head the department of neurosurgery in Montpellier, Paris, and France in 2007. In 2010, he became the head of the team for brain plasticity, stem cell, and glial tumors, and his journey began from that, and now he contributed significantly in the field of neurosciences. The present position he is holding is he is the professor and chairman of neurosurgery department at Montpellier University Medical Center, France. So to start with, Professor Duffau is considered as a game changer in management of low-grade glioma. All the neurosurgeons know that it is Professor Duffau who consider that low-grade glioma can be operated completely and the patient can be cured for a longer duration till reported in the literature. So his concept of transopercular approach made many neurosurgeons feel that this surgery can be possible and the so-called no man's land is no more a no man's land, and insular glioma can be excised completely. And it is some of his theory who contributed significantly to the field of basic science in neurosciences, the field of connectomics. He defined many of the the brain eloquent areas, its networks, its subnetworks, and how they play a major role during surgical excision of the tumor, keeping the patient completely intact functionally. So these are few of his books where he described clearly the mapping of the brain. He's the first one in world who made a concept of direct electrical stimulation with which the cortical as well as the subcortical area can be mapped beautifully and all those functional areas can be detected so that the tumor can be resected safely, keeping the patient completely intact. And one more important concept to his credit is negative brain mapping. He identified all those eloquent nodes and its connections. He gave more than 730 invited lectures. He's a visiting professor in more than 60 institutes. He's a member of editorial board of many esteemed journals like Brain and Language, Neurosurgery, Neuro-Oncology. He's an ad hoc reviewer of more than 100 journals and reviewed more than 950 reviews, including NEJM, Lancet Oncology, Nature Medicine, Nature Reviews of Neurosciences, Nature Review Neurology, Analysis of Neurology, Brain, Cerebral Cortex, Trends in Cognitive Sciences, and Current Biology, etc., etc. Yesterday only we came to know that he is a great neurosurgeon as well as a great researcher. In addition to this, he is also a great piano player. Whenever he gets time, he plays piano, thinking that what best he can do to contribute for the neurosciences. And he is a member of many of the respected societies like French Academy of Medicine, French Academy of Surgery, Royal Academy of Medicine of Belgium, World Academy of Neurological Surgery, and World Federation of Neurological Societies. For his innovative work in neurosciences, mostly in the field of connectomics, brain plasticity, and low-grade glioma, he was offered doctorate honoris causa for a record of 7 times. In 2011, he was declared as the youngest recipient of prestigious Hebert Oligokrona Award, which is considered as the Nobel Prize in Neurosurgery from the Institute of Karolinska, Stockholm. He is probably the first person who mapped the entire brain, and he has the in-depth knowledge of the brain physiology and the brain, the plasticity, and of course, the neuropsychology. These are few of his publications and published in almost all the reputed journals. So coming to end, he is a great researcher. So looking at these figures, so one can imagine how in-depth knowledge he has in the field of neurosciences. So these are some of the magical figures: 721 research articles, citation of almost 50,000, and H index of 114. So nothing can beat this person. So ladies and gentlemen, all esteemed faculties and dear friends, let's welcome the great neurosurgeon of this era, Professor Duffau, who will deliver the prestigious 17th Professor Raj Gulati Oration. Thank you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm very impressed. It's a great honor for me to have this privilege to deliver this tribute to Professor Gulati, especially in front of you, Madam. So I hope you will enjoy this lecture, which is in fact an overview of what I try to achieve for now almost 30 years. about awake surgery in gliomas, but also to try to better understand what we call the connectome of human being, and I hope to have also clinical and fundamental implications beyond the field of glioma surgery. Recently, I published a paper in Lancet Neurology in order to try to better understand what we changed as a paradigmatic shift this past 25 years. And speaking about gliomas, when I started, this tumor was considered as a tumor mass. And we considered that there were some eloquent areas like Broca's area, Wernicke's area, just around the tumor, and that's it. And we had to be careful about that. In fact, now we have understood that this tumor is not focal, but with a diffusion within a vast majority of the hemisphere, and with also modification of the connectome, I mean not only around the tumor, which does not exist in essence, but also regarding remote areas, especially in the contralateral hemisphere. So to think as a brain, as a whole, and not with the classical localizationism view. By understanding that, 25 years ago, I started to change the paradigm by telling the goal is not to remove a tumor mass, but to remove the brain invaded by a tumoral disease as much as I can, according to the fact that the brain is more intelligent than me and was able to compensate the tumor to this point. And this point means that in the vast majority of cases, patients had for the first time seizures. And at that time, we diagnosed the tumor. So I said, if I can remove more, maybe the patient will live longer, but I have to stop according to the functional boundaries in this patient at this given moment, and then I have a chance also to preserve or even to improve his quality of life. And to do it, we had to break with the classical localizationism. And I was a little bit provocative for 20 years by telling there is no one area corresponding to one function against the tradition for more than 1 century in neurology. And that worked. Because at that time I had the chance also to participate in the start of the so-called field of neuroscience, which did not exist 30 years ago. And we started to do systematically functional imaging before and after resection in order to better understand mechanisms of reorganization of the brain at the individual level. Not only speaking about groups of patients, but for this patient at that time. And then we tried also to model what I like to call the backward modeling. I mean, as a neurosurgeon or neurologist, we have to be humble. When the patient is diagnosed for glioma, especially low-grade glioma, so because the first symptom, once again, seizures in vast majority of cases, we have the feeling that everything starts today because we made the diagnosis. While in fact, the brain has the obligation to deal with the tumor for many months to many years. So what happened at the individual level? And if we can understand the past, we have a chance to build the future accordingly at the individual level. And it's exactly what we did by telling, okay, I will remove a part of the brain, including the so-called Broca's area, why not, if already compensated by the central nervous system thanks to this new equilibrium acquired over years while the patient was not aware about that, without any symptoms. And then we had to develop new model of cognition. And from the classical one area, one function, we developed the concept of networking brain 20 to 15 years ago. One network corresponding to one function. And of course, it was simplistic. And now we developed the concept of meta-networking brain. I mean, network of networks. And everything is changing online in order to adapt to the environment. This is the concept. And that worked because we published in Lancet Europe just 1 month ago that for the first time in the literature, patients with low-grade glioma can live over 20 years. Speaking about median survival, of course, because the first patient I operated on is still alive and still a nurse 27 years ago. But also with a preservation of quality of life in 99% of patients, because of course, unfortunately, the result does not exist. We have to be humble, but we can control in the vast majority of cases with a long-term preservation of an active life, including return to work. And this is what I will develop today, even if I will be provocative by showing this kind of very extensive precision, but you can really know that all these patients, I will show the MRIs, benefited from 2 to 3 hours of extensive cognitive assessment after surgery, not immediately, but a few months to years after surgery. And by being more preventive, so arriving earlier in the natural history of the disease, then we can change radically this very aggressive tumor, while it was considered as benign when I started 30 years ago, but the median survival at that time was 6 years. Indeed, these patients are not so well. And then we started to be objective by doing a cognitive assessment 25 years ago in a patient enjoying normal life with just seizures. And we understood that the tumor was not benign. Otherwise, we'll become malignant and we'll kill the patient. We understood that if we left the tumor, then we will see a decline of the cognitive functions. So the goal is not only for the patient to return to normal life after surgery, but to continue to enjoy this normal life, because if you apply the concept of wait and see, then the patient will not have a normal life. He will have more and more seizures. But we have also to acknowledge the limitation of neuroplasticity. The brain's magic, but has some limitations. And when it's telling you, as a warning, seizures, if you do cognitive assessment, vast majority of cases, you will find some degrees of cognitive disorders. And what is really strange, but now we start to understand how, the patient is not aware about that. The family is not aware about that. The professional around the patient are not aware about that, because modification very slowly of the strategy, and maybe the patient is more tired, the colleague is more depressed, burnout, and something like this. No, it's related to the tumor itself, and not to the location of the tumor, but to the migration of the glioma cells along the white matter tract, so the connectivity. So this is the reason why I was more or less obliged to break with the traditional model when I was younger, to better understand how the tumor, the disease, thought, and this tumor thought according to the connectome. And it's really amazing to understand that when you do surgery in 2 patients, today and tomorrow, with the same tumor, in the same location, with the same volume, the same symptomatology, and so on, in fact, you have 2 different brains, so you have to do 2 different surgeries and to adapt at the individual functional anatomy at that time. So, of course, fMRI, DTI are beautiful in order to better understand these mechanisms of reorganization, but I know that for 25 years, this is not the truth. So you cannot operate based on fMRI DTI. And I know that today many neurosurgeons would like to develop new software in order to simplify again the connectome processing. Forget it. You will not succeed, because the brain is more intelligent than us. So we have just to listen what the brain has to talk, say to us. And it's exactly what I'm doing, not by using DTI, which is just a movement of molecule and not a function, which is not reliable from one department of neuroscience to another one. You give a set of data, they will build something totally different. Today, I know them because I am connected to this field. So do not rely on your scientists. They are there just in order to optimize our knowledge, but not to help you to operate these patients. So please do systematically awake surgery. And the brain will talk to you by telling, please continue to remove as much as you can according to my feedback, because I did the job for many years, because the tumor was there and I had to adapt, explaining why the patient is not so bad, except if you do an extensive cognitive assessment before to go to the OR. Everything is logical, full of common sense. And you have, of course, to adapt the tasks according not only to the fact that the patient doesn't want to be hemiplegic, aphasic, but wants to return to an active life, also according to the job, to the hobbies, to the leisures, and to the culture. Because I received patients coming from more than 30 countries, 5 continents, including from India, and each time I had to adapt to different concepts beyond the connectome itself, because the expectations are not the same. If you are living in US, they have more or less no metacognition, or in Japan, because they love the social cognition and to increase the mapping and monitoring of mentalizing, for instance. And I had to learn that, of course, through my career. So in other words, when I am into the OR, definitely I confirm I'm not a neurosurgeon. I'm just a neuroscientist removing a part of the brain invaded by a disease in order to try to make it chronic under control for the next 20 years in human beings enjoying a normal life. So never I will use technology into the OR. No neuronavigation, no intraoperative MRI, no DTI, no fMRI, no microscope, no robot, blah, blah. But the best oncological and functional results published today, and I will insist about that, of course, have been obtained without any technology. So you can do it everywhere with a fork, a knife, your understanding of the brain, and a very good team. So if you start to speak about technology, artificial intelligence, and so on, go to Hollywood in order to make movies with Brad Pitt. But do not think that you are a medical doctor. So to recreate the normal life, we ask to the patient into the operating theater to do many things simultaneously, the multitasking protocol. Typically, the patient is not just moving or speaking, but thinking, understanding, associating, self-evaluating, and so on. And while the patient is doing movement language, and in this case in 2 different languages, because the patient came from Sao Paulo, then there was a translator, and we switched from English to Portuguese. I removed here Brocosera, strange, because the patient was not aware about the fact that it was the area of language, because she continued to speak and to combine and to associate, blah, blah. And when I stimulated in the depth at the level of the connectivity, I will not insist, but it was the crossing fibers between the SLF and the arcuate fasciculus, then the patient stopped to speak, to move, and I say, okay, I have to stop because the brain is telling me, don't go further, at least today, because maybe we will have a chance to come back in a few years, because in the meantime, the brain will readapt. This is the magic of the brain. So according to that, we understood also that if we ask the patient, under the guidance of neuropsychologists into the OR, to do many tasks simultaneously, but with time constraint, I have to do everything in less than 5 seconds. Otherwise, in real life, you cannot make a decision online. So you have an insight into the return to work. Yes, into the OR, in a patient having an awake surgery with resection of so-called Broca's area, if you want, you can have insight into the real chance for him, her to return to an active life, including speaking about social professional activities. It's not a dream. We did that for 20 years. And in parallel, of course, we built new model of the connectome, but not speaking about the connectome as an esoteric term, but based on the reality of 1,000 patients we operated on, and we have seen the anatomofunctional correlation. So you can publish as a neurosurgeon in Science or Nature, and also to change radically natural history of the disease by tripping the median survival while preserving the quality of life. And once again, with a small team, 10 people, but all PhD in neuroscience, and with a fork and knife, no technology, no money. So if it was possible in Montpellier, the middle of nowhere, it's possible everywhere, including here. So what we discovered very quickly is that Broca's area does not exist. I told you that, and that's true in France, but that's true also in the US or China. That you can apply all tasks you would like to create into the operating theater according to each patient. So it's endless. I did not say that you have to apply my protocol because I have no protocol. I will change every day more or less. And each year we implement new tasks, not in all patients, but according to the wishes of this human being at that time. And of course, what I would like to introduce again and again, while it's not new in my message talks, is that human being is first of all emotion. So we have to preserve, of course, movement, language, cognition, blah, blah, but first of all, the personality, the mood, the behavior. And except so few neurosurgeons in the world, 20 years after this first draft, finally, we continue to say, oh, the left dominant hemisphere, we have to wake the patient in order to do language mapping, and the right non-dominant hemisphere, we do not care. We have just to do MEPs under general anesthesia in order to avoid left hemiplegia, and that's it. Except when it's you or your relatives, because I spent my life to operate close friends or relatives to colleagues telling that I was more or less crazy, except when they have friends with brain tumor. And suddenly they're telling, but you know, it's very important to preserve cognition and emotion. Really? I thought that we do not care. Yes, yes, but you have the real truth, and you have the publications. You have the politics. You have the tradition. You have the dogmas. You have the non-plasticity of neurosurgeons. I am very provocative, but 30 years after that, I do not understand why we are not close to the common sense. In other words, if the patient is well in front of me, not already hemiplegic aphasic, of course, I will have the humility to propose systematically to the patient to be awake in order to discover his or her connectome in real time, and not to apply the atlas published recently by a scientist, a neurosurgeon, or brain lab. Speaking about movement, it's totally different not to be hemiplegic or to play golf. I operated on a guy who liked to win Olympic Games 3 years ago, and he was finally too old. I will not say more, but it's not a secret because he will publish movies about that. And I said, what you have to do is to become a coach for the team of Olympic Games in Paris 4 months ago. And I said, I will operate you, you will recover, you will be a coach, you will show them what they have to do, speaking about complex movement, so beyond, I am hemiplegic, yes, no. And I will continue to follow you only if you come back with a medal. And he came back with 2 medals, gold and bronze. Why? Because I preserved the frontostriatal tract, the frontal axon tract, so involved in the control of movement. But to control movement, you need a feedback. And we had a very exciting discussion yesterday about that. Not only the somatosensory feedback, but also the awareness of your own body, and not only the perception. In other words, we can induce phantom limb syndrome, for instance. But 99% of neurosurgeons I know in the world today will continue to do this kind of surgery within the so-called right non-dominant hemisphere retrocentrally under general anesthesia. It's totally crazy. If you do an extensive assessment, you will see following surgery that patients are not well. So we try to explain that by publishing, not now in Nature or Lancet, but in Cancers, to convince neuro-oncologists that they have to know what means connection, and not just I am hemiplegic, yes, no. The consciousness of the intention of complex action, like this guy who was a very good coach for Olympics. The most important is to understand the interactions between networks, not only between cortical areas, but networks. And these interactions are changing all day long. And then if you stimulate the patient during surgery at the level of this FST and FAT, you can change the programming of speech, and especially to induce stuttering. I have induced a permanent stuttering in a patient 20 years ago, and I needed 10 more years to understand what I did at that time, because the frontal aspirant tracked what was not yet discovered. Now we have understood the functional anatomy of the arcuate fasciculus, the SLF, especially 3 at the level of the articulatory loop. No, we have understood nothing. We published recently a paper in Brain by telling we have understood nothing about the functional anatomy of the most described fasciculus in human since 1 century, since Desjardins. And now we have to be humble by telling every day we will add something to the model in order to better understand these dynamics of the connectome, and not just to see pathways, but interactions changing over time. The inferior frontooccipital fasciculus is involved in multimodal semantics, verbal semantics, but also non-verbal semantics. I have no reason to speak. You have understood the message, because you have bilateral integrity of the inferior frontooccipital fasciculus. You think that we have understood? No, this paper is in revision in Brain today, because the functional anatomy of the ventral semantic pathway is not understood. Not enough in order to have 99% plus 1 of reliability for patients. Once again, I love to say that when you stimulate 2 fasciculi, because it's not working in isolation, it's like a painter with 2 colors, and suddenly you will see another one. So it's not just semantic paraphagia or anomia, you will have jargonophagia. This is true for lexical access to proper name. I operated on a presenter on TV. He told me I need absolutely to know the name of the guy in front of me just in 1 second, if possible less, 500 milliseconds, otherwise I will not continue to work. So we adapted new tasks into the operating theater in order to recognize the proper name and the famous faces, but into the OR by stimulating, and we discovered that it was related, partly of course, not exclusively, to the inferior longitudinal fasciculus, which is true for common name 2, which is true for the speed, the reaction time. And remember, if you increase the reaction time while giving the good answer, you will not return to work. So you can start really to model that into the OR. You think we know the anatomy? We published in Brain this year a new fasciculus, Arnold bundle. Nothing is new, because it has been described by Arnold. Who knows the Arnold bundle? Who knows the function, the role of the Arnold bundle? No one. So we used, at that time, of course, DTI, intraoperative mapping, cognitive assessment, a dissection also, to demonstrate that it has a role in lexical access. So another piece into the puzzle. So it's unless I can spend the night to speak about a network involved in reading. I will not, of course, but if a patient is telling you, I need absolutely to continue to read, you have to integrate new tasks and to see these interactions between the semantics, the syntactical, the reaction time, the lexical access, the movement, and so on. And this is the reason why we published in physiological reviews. I mean, it's not surgery anymore, or oncology anymore, or medicine anymore. This is the Bible of the physiology. And we say, now we have to stop to speak about localizationism. And it has been accepted because everyone knows that what we are teaching in university is not adapted. But it's not enough. Speaking about cognitive functions, we have to maintain or not the working memory, the ability to do many things simultaneously, to control what we would like to do by also updating online what the brain is doing. Otherwise, you have not adapted behavior. I cannot insist about everything, but it's exactly what we did. We did that also for the visuospatial orientation. Of course, you have not to cut the fibers at the level of the optic tract. Otherwise, in France, at least, you cannot drive with hemianopsia, so you have not a normal life. Almost 20 years ago, we published in Science that the SLF2 was involved in spatial awareness in order to avoid hemi-neglect. But finally, we said, no, it's not enough. Our patients are driving, but they have attentional problem. Is it possible to increase the level? Yes, we published, so just 2 years ago, in Nature Communication, how to increase our knowledge, the level, and also so the accuracy according to the wishes of the patient if she would like to preserve the attention of visuospatial cognition. So cognition, and of course, emotion. And I have the regret to tell you that the right so-called non-dominant hemisphere is critical for all these functions, especially for personality mood, which is not to be considered in isolation, but also processing with all other functions we have seen. How I did it? Because finally, I avoided 25 years ago for the patient to die and to be hemiplegic, 20 years ago to be aphasic, 15 years ago to have a strong cognitive deficit, and at that time I said, okay, I succeeded. The family told me, no, my husband is there, still working, perfect, congratulations, I'm happy, but it changed, it's not the same. So we said we have definitely to be involved also in the better understanding of the neural bases underpinning emotion. And I will not insist about the first correlation we did, but just to tell you that we introduced new tasks into the OR with the recognition of emotion. We spoke about that with some of you this morning, especially in psychiatrists. I operated on medical doctors because they would like to continue to be empathic. And to make a long history short, you have two levels. The first is the perception of emotion of others, the low level of mentalizing, which is critical in normal life, not only into the operating theater, and the second level, the inference of intention of others. If you have discrepancies just in between, you can induce Asperger's syndrome. So I started to deliver this kind of talk dedicated to that in a society of psychiatrists, because finally they would like to know better what happened in patients with this kind of diseases, especially autism. And we started to understand that, especially discrepancy between the interaction between the right cingulate, the right inferior frontooccipital fasciculus, the right arcuate fasciculus, and finally by considering their interactions bilaterally and with other functions we have seen. One step forward, we asked the patient to self-evaluate into the operating theater because they can make an error and to say, I'm sure that I gave the good answer, anosognosia, an insight into what we call metacognition. I mean, as a human being, we should be aware about the fact that we know what we know. But I know many people not able to do it without brain tumor. So the right so-called non-dominant hemisphere is critical for normal life. So please do systematically a mapping at the individual level. And to avoid to be too politically incorrect, I decided to demonstrate that in practice by comparing Duffau to Duffau. Duffau, when I did a surgery 20 years ago under general anesthesia, especially in the so-called right non-dominant hemisphere, because at the time it's exactly what I learned, because they told me that. And the second period by telling, no, I have to change the model. It does not work. So awake mapping in the right non-dominant hemisphere, and suddenly you can see the return to work, which was around 80% initially, more than 95% now. In the classical literature today, the return to work after this kind of surgery is 50%, especially if you use technology. 50% or 95%? What do you want? I want to use technology because it's smart, fun. Okay, as you want. Maybe also you can decide to be a medical doctor. So we decided to do meta-analysis recently, awake surgery or not in the so-called right non-dominant hemisphere for high-grade and low-grade glioma. Of course, no surprise if you do awake surgery, the patients are better after this kind of intraoperative mapping by resecting a tumor in the so-called right non-dominant hemisphere. It's demonstrated. Everyone knows that. So why it's not done systematically? It's not related to the impossibility to have enough money because you can do it for free. So what to continue to improve? Definitely oncological issues. When I started, this tumor was considered as benign, wait and see. Some of you knew that. Biopsy, eventually radiotherapy, and that's it. Quality of life never evaluated, median survival 6 years. I did more than 1,000 surgery in these so-called eloquent areas. Definitely, I don't know what it means. It depends at the individual level. Broca's area, Wernicke's area, behind the Labbé vein, the central area, but the preservation of the connectivity in the depth, the corpus callosum. This patient was able to play piano 3 months after surgery, the concerto for Rachmaninoff, piano and orchestra. You see the level we're speaking about. Mortality 0. Thank you to your anesthesiologist. If you would like in Formula One, to be world champion, we need to have very good specialists around you, around the patient. Less than 1% of severe permanent deficit, as I told you. It's impossible to have 0%. Why? We have a tendency to tend toward that as these past 10 years, but maybe next week I will have a problem. So in all cases, we did systematically cognitive assessment before and after surgery, and 86% of patients had also cognitive preservation plus 10% of improvement. Duffau, you are telling me that patient is well before surgery. You can remove Broca's area and it's better after surgery. I cannot believe on it. Okay? Because you do not believe on the brain. The brain's magic. The patient was not so well before surgery. You did not perform cognitive assessment, and he had finally some verbal working memory deficit. How do you want to know that if we are just telling, how are you? Well, you see the patient is well. And by doing systematically cognitive rehabilitation after surgery based on the immediate postoperative cognitive assessment, and by the feedback of the patient himself, herself, 94 to 95% of return to work. So recently, because the new WHO classification, you have to only select IDH mutated tumor, otherwise, the patient does not exist. So to be published in Lancet, I played the rule, and I selected, in my experience, among 1,000 surgeries, those with a molecular pattern, which was IDH mutated. 600 consecutive patients. For the first time in the literature, the median survival is over 20 years and not yet reached. So I hope I will continue to maintain them alive. And I will be provocative. We hate protocols in Montpellier and in my network, national and international network. And especially we hate, sorry about that, but early radiotherapy, because we know the limitation of neuroplasticity. If you irradiate the connectivity around the surgical cavity, you did a great job, and finally, 5 years later, patient will have decline of cognitive functions. 5 years later, it's good for a glioblastoma patient. And speaking about patients who should live more than 20 years, so they will spend at least 10 years with a cognitive deficit, and after 20 years, they have dementia. Postpone radiotherapy. Immediate radiotherapy after surgery, in my experience, less than 2%. And suddenly the patients are living longer and better. Yes, it's related to molecular pattern. Of course, if you have a glioblastoma, it's worse than a low-grade glioma. If you have an astrocytoma, it's worse like an oligodendroglioma. And you will change what? The patient has the tumor. But by doing this kind of surgery, according to the connectome, you will triple, nonetheless, median survival. So in astrocytoma, median survival is 15 years. In the classical literature, today is less than 10 years. But also with a preservation of the quality of life, especially if you did a supratutorization. I developed this concept, as I told you, more than 15 years ago, and at the time I was crazy. Today's fashion, you know, to do a supratutorization in meeting like AANS meeting US. Yes, of course, you will live longer, but I would like to see the cognitive assessment of your patients and return to an active life. We do not care. The most important is for the patient to be alive. No, you decided that. Ask to the patients. So it's exactly what we did. We demonstrated that, of course, if you do a supratutorization in this sub-series with 600 low-grade glioma, they are living longer. But we did also cognitive assessment, and we published that in Brain this year, about 400 low-grade glioma, which is unique in the literature by telling supratutorization where only occasionally less than 2% less well tolerated, but in fact, you have a preservation of the cognition. If you do, of course, the realization according to the functional boundaries we have detailed just before. And you can increase the quality of life, especially if you are doing supratutorization in patients with intractable seizures before surgery. Because unfortunately, even today, many neurologists continue to follow this kind of patient by telling, don't go to meet the surgeon. You will not have a normal life after that. And you know the answer of patients, but I have no normal life with intractable seizures and a tumor brain. And after surgery, in more than 80% cases in this subgroup of intractable seizures, no seizures anymore. So new life. Indeed, for the first time in the literature, we demonstrated that it was possible to be not only autonomous, but to continue to be active, including to work for at least 15 years. So I do not understand what means the dilemma of surgical neuro-oncology. Please remove more according to the understanding of the connectome at the individual level, and then patient will live longer and better, not only to preserve the quality of life before surgery, but to improve it. So we will continue to improve that. And the goal is to arrive earlier. This morning we spoke about incidental discovery. So no symptoms. So many surgeons are telling you are crazy to operate patients who are well. But in this case, if they are well, while there is a growing tumor, that means that the limitation of neuroplasticity has not been reached, not yet. So I can remove more and the patient will recover. Demonstrate that. It's done. 97% of return to work. To be honest, patients not able to return to work for administrative issues. An airline pilot. And they say, never you will pilot again. But cognitive assessment was perfect. No seizures, no residue, no chemotherapy, no antiepileptic drugs, no radiotherapy. Yes, but you will not pilot. Okay, the society. It's true in Montpellier, it's true in San Francisco, it's true in Canada, it's true in Italy, and so on. I disagree with the introduction. I'm not able to cure this patient, unfortunately, because we have a problem. We do not know the origin of this tumor. So after 5, 10, 15, 20 years, unfortunately, in all cases, I started to see a regrowth, a recurrence of the tumor. What are we doing at that time? We ask to the brain to help us, because in the meantime, the brain reorganized. And we demonstrated that very nicely by using, of course, a non-invasive DTI, VBM, fMRI, and so on, typically by showing that if you have an insular low-grade glioma, which is very frequent, in the contralateral side, in adults, you have an increase of the volume of the contralateral insula. So an increase of the functional connectivity, which is exactly the origin. I don't know, it's a loop, but I can use it in order, after surgery, and after a transitory deficit, after recovery, for instance, SMA syndrome, to demonstrate the balance between hemispheres. Once again, there is no dominant hemisphere, but a holistic view of a brain, and to say, okay, the brain reorganized before the first surgery, but also after the first surgery, so I will reoperate the patient. Typically, the first surgery in this patient, I stopped because the so-called primary motor cortex. And 5 years later, after normal life, no chemotherapy, no radiotherapy, blah, blah, what we did is to reoperate and to remove the so-called knob of the hand in the patient. I say that yesterday, I want to play guitar. So we published recently the first atlas of comparison of the first surgery and the second surgery, and to see the modulation finally invented by the brain itself at the individual level. And the pattern of reorganization was different from one patient to another one. So we have to adapt. Typically here, I was not able to remove the so-called vernicose area. I hate to lose, but of course, the goal was to stop because the brain told me, stop. The patient enjoyed normal life for 10 years. No chemotherapy, no antiepileptic drugs, blah, blah. And 10 years later, the tumor regrew, and I said, now we will reoperate. What happened? I removed vernicose area, and the patient is still alive, enjoying normal life. Damasio was wrong. It's possible to do this kind of very extensive resection bilaterally, but of course in 2 to 3 times to give time to the brain to continue to reorganize by preserving cognition, emotion, and metacognition. And when you apply this concept to high-grade glioma, 2 and 3, our patients are living 18 years, which is unique in the literature too, but by enjoying normal life. Once again, after reoperation, 94% of return to work, because we did systematically an objective cognitive assessment. It's just not just my view, but the reality. So we published an atlas, statistically of course, not of how the brain is processing, but the limitation of neuroplasticity. You can use this atlas after a stroke. You have more than 90% of chances to know if the patient will recover or not. And of course, this atlas was never used because neurosurgeons or neurologists do not want to know too much. Why I love to anticipate what will happen within the next 10 to 20 years. After that, I don't know. So again, this slide, for some of you who saw that already, but to explain why I do not use microscope, because when you are focusing in the depth, you don't know where you are. And you have a risk to cut 3 more millimeters. And at that time, for a surgeon, I cut just 3 millimeters. No, you disconnected 1/3 of the hemisphere. So that means that the patient will not recover because of disconnectionism syndrome, at least will not return to work. And this is exactly what radiotherapists are doing by imposing through the protocols early radiotherapy at the level of the connectivity limitation of neuroplasticity. And everyone knows that in this randomized trial 15 years ago, early radiotherapy did not increase the median survival in comparison to the delayed radiotherapy, but induced a decline of the cognitive functions. Of course, we can understand why, by burning the connectivity. And nonetheless, everyone continues to irradiate the brain. Can you explain to me? I cannot. This is against common sense. So never I irradiated the brain based on a surrogate progression-free survival, which is just a psychotherapy of neuro-oncologists. I do not need psychotherapy. My patients are living more than 20 years. And the goal was not to see the PFS, but the real survival. What wants a patient is not to see a stable MRI. What he wants is to live longer and better. That's it. So easy that we've forgotten that. You know that in this live publication in Lancet, we demonstrated the survival over 20 years, and the referee said, we want absolutely to have the PFS, but we do not care. We have the survival for the first time. We want the PFS, the rigidity of neuro-oncologists. So we decided to play around this rigidity by proposing a recursive neuro-oncological management according to each patient. I mean, avoid to irradiate too early. Remove as much as you can according to the connectome. Induce plasticity by pushing the brain thanks to postoperative cognitive rehabilitation and return to a normal life, including work, which is very good for the brain plasticity. Come back by doing a second surgery more or less 5 years later. Then finally do chemotherapy, which does not exist, does not induce any cognitive deficit. Conversely to radiotherapy. And finally, we started just a few years ago to see some honest people telling in the literature, you know, finally after radiotherapy in low-grade glioma, 5 years later, 50% of our patients, it's not from Montpellier, to show that we are not so crazy, have cognitive and emotional disorders. 5 years later, they are living 20 years. We demonstrated this year that after chemotherapy, the cognition is preserved. Of course, I do not want to do a beautiful surgery by preserving emotion, personality, mentalizing, metacognition, blah, blah, and to refer the patient to neuro-oncologist will induce a decline of cognitive functions. With temozolomide, PCV, no risk. So I published just for the first time also because I become older. It's an ongoing history. Patients with 5 surgeries, after 20 years, not yet irradiated, still alive, enjoying normal life. One of them is director of an hospital. So it's possible to remove each time more brain, and maybe, I hope, I will reoperate him in 5 years after 25 years. To conclude on the fact that we have not to be dogmatic, I say that for the connectome, I will say that again for the neuro-oncological issues. My patients have seen 5 different classifications from Geneva, the WHO classification. Fortunately, we never followed this kind of recommendation, which is in fact now more or less a diktat. Why? Because they never understood that this tumor is heterogeneous. You can have a focus of grade 3 or 4 in the middle. You do a supratentorialization, and 20 years ago, they would have been said, more or less, it's a low-grade glioma. You know why? Because at that time, only biopsy. So you had many risks to miss this high-grade focus. Today, more and more people are doing lobectomy. They started to understand that if you remove the tumor, it's better. What a scoop. And finally, you will see that when we arrive, in the vast majority of cases, you have already some foci malignant transformation. And the new classification is telling, this is a glioblastoma, we have to do a Stu protocol. Why? I removed the tumor. You did not cure the patient, Duffau. I never say that. But no reason to do chemoradiotherapy. It's a high-grade glioma. No, in your imagination, in your classification. In the real truth, the focus of high-grade glioma is into the lab. Demonstrate that before it's done. No chemoradiotherapy, 5-year survival rate, more than 95%. Even if you demonstrate, if it's against dogmas, they will say, I do not believe you. Please come. 1,000 people came to Montpellier. Neuro-oncologists sometimes, neurosurgeons, neuroscientists, neuroanatomists, neuroradiologists, neurophysiologists, and so on and so on. But the vast majority of them did not come. Why? Because they know this is the truth. Remember, my patients are coming from abroad. I cannot lie, including when I decided 20 years ago not to treat this patient after a complete resection while it was a grade 3 with enhancement. The patient is still alive, and we started just now, 22 years later, for the first time chemotherapy, not irradiated. So I am a family doctor now. I have seen their son becoming, their children becoming adults, and asking me, maybe it's a good timing to do an MRI in order to see if I have a glioma, a screening. That's true even in very big tumor. because many colleagues are telling, yeah, but you selected the patients with a small tumor by arriving earlier. Of course, if I can, I will change radically in natural history of the disease. But sometimes I have also patients with very big tumor. And you know what? The results are exactly similar. So really, to conclude, I would like to tell you that we are not interested by our patients. How many colleagues are interested by the return to work? If the patient is not hemiplegic, aphasic, if he's still alive, that's it. We did a meta-analysis about that. You imagine thousands of papers about low-grade glioma patients. Only less than 20 were interested by the return to work. Sexual dysfunction. You imagine, between 20 and 50. 3 papers in the literature. But in all meetings of neurosurgery, oh, they can do that, so they are well, they are well. They are well. Did you follow your patient by yourself 27 years later as a family doctor when they have sexual dysfunction? It's a problem. But you think, Duffau, that you can start to explain that? Of course, by seeing the interactions between networks, emotion, cognition, and so on. Creativity. I made a revision just now in my hotel room about paper we will very probably publish in the journal Neurosurgery regarding professional artists. We already published that for musicians. I speak about musicians able to give a concert at a zenith. This is this level. You can see the modification of the painting style before my surgery and after surgery. Mysticism for 10 years in a professional painter, and after that, cubism for the next 15 years. And now, it made time, of course, took time. We started to understand that it was modification of the balance between the Duffau mode network involving creativity, introspection, awareness, self-awareness, and so on and so on, the executive control network, and in the middle, the salience network. Of course, it will not explain everything, but it's a start. I will not insist, but I was invited recently in a meeting dedicated to awareness. So beyond neurosurgery or oncological considerations. And of course, awareness means nothing because you have different levels of awareness, and we have seen especially the intention of action, bodily awareness, spatial awareness, social awareness, self-awareness, and so on. So think in integrative model. And to help people, we published this atlas, the soul of the real function of the white matter tract in the literature, and of course in the MNI template. And of course, no one is interested by that because it's too complex. But I never said that brain was easy to understand. The brain is just talking to me, and I am an observer. And I try to model that by introducing the 4th dimension, the interactions between both hemispheres, and by insisting on the fact that the brain processing is based on a perpetual succession of new equilibrium states. How do you want to use an atlas? To try to predict the kind of deficit we can induce after surgery, now speaking about hemiplegia, aphasia, but maybe modification of the behavior and so on, we published the concept of the connectotome, connectotomy, adapted to the anatomofunctional variability from one individual to another one. And of course, now we can use DTI not into the operating theater, but in order to publish new multimodal examination of the brain using DTI, fMRI, intraoperative mapping, cognitive scores, and longitudinally. And by using that, yes, we can start to predict exactly how much of the diffusion of the tumor we will remove at an individual level. We can predict the return to an active life. We can predict if the patient will continue to have the same scores, but also the reaction time. We can predict how the neurophysiology will help us. It was the discussion of yesterday during the meeting of intraoperative monitoring. We can predict how to change the program of rehabilitation after surgery and not just to apply the classical book by telling, oh, he removed Broca's area, I will rehabilitate speech. Forget it. It does not work like this. We can predict when we will reoperate the patient. I think I will do a second surgery in 4.5 years approximately. and we can start to dream about inducing more neuroplasticity, but I have said that I did not speak too much about that. So the conclusion is that you have now for younger people the possibility just to apply protocol, to use surrogate, to be interested by the disease, the molecular biology, and to be involved in the new WHO classification. Or to be interested by the brain of each patient, the natural history of the disease over years, because we changed this disease, and to adapt not a protocol, but an individualized management over years according to the feedback provided not by the patient, but by the human being in front of you and his, her family. And suddenly, thanks to this connectomic neuro-oncology, and I hope now I gave you some argumentations in order to define what I meant at the level of the second slide by telling, I published that recently in Lancet, by trying to change the philosophy and not just the technique. I do not care, I'm not so skilled. You can play piano by avoiding to think about your fingers. Then suddenly we have a chance to really change radically the history of patients with brain tumors, because when I started 30 years ago, my masters told me in Paris, Duffau, you are idiot to would like to think that you will be helpful for these patients. We have just to do one thing in glioma, and that's it. I hoped that we changed the vision, the concept, the philosophy, and that you will use it in order to go beyond for the epilepsy surgery, the DBS, and why not the BCI to restore the brain, because I continue to believe that it's the future of neurosurgery. Thank you so much once again for this honor.
Thank you, Professor Duffau, for this mesmerizing talk. Rather, this is one intense and great 1-hour journey into the world of brain networks and meta-networks. So now may I request Director PGI, Professor Vivek Lal sir, and HOD Neurosurgery Professor S.K. Gupta sir to present a memento to our orator, Professor Duffau. Wait. Now may I request Professor Parampreet and Professor Rajesh Chabra sir to present a scroll to our orator, Professor Duffau. ठीक है सर आप चलिए. Thank you very much, sir. So now may I request Mrs. Monica Gulati and Mr. Ravi Bhatia sir to please come to the front. So may I request Professor Nidhi Panda madam and Professor Sandeep Mohindra sir to present a scroll to our guest, Mrs. Monica Gulati and Mr. Ravi Bhatia. Now, may I request Professor Sanjay Jain sir to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a proud privilege for me to offer my gratitude to Professor Duffau for this fascinating talk. The only thing I can say is, sir, it is good that I did my graduation in 1979 and not today. Otherwise, first I had to de-learn my neuroanatomy and relearn today. So, but I must say that the whole thought process is very, very provocative. And in fact, there are many points which needs little more elaboration, little more discussion. So I think with this, I would thank everybody, each one of you who is present here today for this wonderful oration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. So this is the end of this session, and now may I request everybody to join for a tea downstairs. Please, sir. Thank you.